Hello, and welcome to the Todd and Taylor Show. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask.
And this is another edition of Coffee and Comics, which we've been doing for several weeks now, and which I really enjoy.
I do too. It's
been
good.
It's cool. We used to try to cover like every single book we were picking up every week or whatever, and it always, I know the last time we did that, I just said, hey, I'm going to list a ton of stuff on my to be read pile just to keep me honest. And this has worked out so much better. We each pick one book. We talk about that book during one episode. And so you get like two great picks and a little bit more details about them. And
I like diving more in depth. It reminds me, I always compare it to the three kids at the end of every Reading Rainbow episode who are like, LeVar's like, you don't have to take my word for it. But it cuts to the kids doing their thing. It's a lot like that.
Yeah.
But just with comics and graphic novels, which, I think it's interesting. One of the reasons I wanted to do this show or this style of show, I know there's a lot of people out there who aren't, tried and true comic nerds in that traditional respect. Maybe they're people who, walk by a comics or graphic novel aisle at Barnes and Noble and go, I'd like to be part of this. I just don't know where to start. This show is kind of for them too. I wanted sort of something that folks can, listen to and get some recommendations on without feeling overwhelmed or like they have to be so deep into geek culture to consume anything.
Right. And the other component to that is that we often find ourselves drinking coffee when we do these podcasts.
Exactly.
Are you drinking some coffee today?
I am doing the seasonal evergreen latte from Sonder Coffee, which is just down the street, local coffee shop here in Aurora. Sonder Coffee for all of your caffeinated needs. It's actually really good. They just launched their seasonal stuff for the fall, and damn it, it's got like juniper in it. It's fantastic.
Juniper, okay.
Yeah,
I had a chai tea latte the other week. And every time I have that, it reminds me why I never drink chai tea lattes, and I keep falling for it, and it just tastes like eating a bowl of potpourri. So to me, whenever I think of seasonal drinks, that's what I think of. Like, yeah, maybe that's what a chai tea is like. So
interesting.
I guess I'm not into seasonal drinks. I'm drinking a Simple Truth organic seltzer water, lemon lime.
I don't know. That's not really coffee, Todd.
I know. A little inside baseball. We're not actually recording this episode in the morning. And I skipped the coffee. I had coffee this morning, but not right now.
Well, that's all right. You get one pass, and then you got to be back on again. Although you're not, like we've discussed this before, you're not really as big a coffee person as I am. You tend to go to Starbucks a lot more, I think, or you're more of a utilitarian drinker, let's just say.
That is true. Yes, I reject all the qualities of coffee that people like. I don't want it hot. I don't want it bitter. It's like, wow. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm finding it's I got to find a middle ground. I don't want like super sweet stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying a new thing now. Like often in the afternoons, I will grab this small iced latte from Kit Coffee, which is nearby to where I live and work. And I don't know where their beans come from, but it's a delicious coffee. And I'm just trying this thing now where it's like, I wonder if I'll sleep better and be more productive the next day if I don't have a latte in the afternoon. Yeah. So that's why I'm getting the sparkly water tonight.
I used to do that, and then I just this week, especially around 3:00, I'm just like, I need a latte. I'm so
dude, that's the thing. It's like you just start fading, and it's like I gotta hit that. So
yeah. Well, you don't have a coffee, but you do have a pick this week, and as usual, we don't know each other's picks going into the episode. You, the listener, do. We usually put it right in the cover art, but we don't know each other's picks, and that's part of the fun. And I guess, Todd, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I went really mainstream. We have kind of introed our last few episodes and disclaimered a bunch about, how we love Image Comics and Drawn and Quarterly. And we, it's not always the big two, DC and Marvel, that we talk about, but I went DC this week. And I slightly cheated. I'm hoping you let me get away with it. Sharp listeners may recognize that the last time we did a giant roundup, I talked about how I had been getting the issues of Supergirl Being Super, which was a limited series of 4 issues, and the issues are like, they're not mega size or something. They're smaller than a trade, but they're longer than a normal floppy single issue comic. And
Mm.
so it's yeah, they did a 4 issue run, and I really thought that by the time we recorded this episode,
Mm.
I would have information about when that was being released as a trade or a hardback or something.
Mm.
And still there is nothing. So if you go on Amazon, look for Supergirl Being Super, and you'll see issue like 104, 204, 304, etc. That's what I'm talking about, because it's one complete series and story. And yeah, I'll just jump right into it. It was written by Mariko Tamaki, whom I am unfamiliar with, and Joelle Jones, with whom I am familiar. Joelle Jones did a book with Jamie Rich called You Have Killed Me, which was this cool like noir detective story, like basically like a hard-boiled detective story as a black and white comic. And it was in a hardback, book. So it was not the shape of a comic. It was the shape of a novel. So it was just this very cool thing. So I've always, since then, which was several years ago, I've followed Joelle Jones's art, and especially when she's gotten into, when she's been working for Marvel and DC, I've tried to pick up what I can, like single issue wise and stuff. So I was really excited that she was on this series. And I've also previously mentioned we do have a Todd and Taylor show that's all about season 1 of Supergirl, the show. And I think in that I talked about how I've followed various reboots of Supergirl. And there was one, I almost want to say it was in the 90s, but it may have been early 2000s, where they rebooted Supergirl. Supergirl had been dead in the universe possibly since Crisis on Infinite Earths, or they just didn't have an ongoing series with her or something. So there's this weird way of bringing her back and retelling the origin story through the Batman and Superman comic, which I actually really liked that reboot. She goes to live with the Amazons and gets trained that way. And there's this it's kind of a My Two Dads situation with Batman and Superman. Batman being very suspicious of this alien, and Superman feeling this great kinship with his cousin. And it was very cool, like retelling. There was at the time a big, the art was sort of its day. And I quickly identified as like, hey, why are we drawing a 16-year-old girl in like tiny little skirts and, half nude all the time? And so it was just, it was a book of the 2000s. So I can't vouch for all of it and tell you like everything about it is perfect, but it was a good story. And then I guess with the New 52 or whatever the last reboot was, I just wasn't feeling the Supergirl stuff. And this is it's out of canon, I guess. And how do I want to say this? Talks about the origin story. It sort of includes the origin story, but in a really understated way, which I really appreciate, because as you and I have talked about before, especially with movies, like we just don't need to be told the same origin story again that we've heard 1,000 times, and often the antidote to that a lot of times is creators will try to tell it in like this radically new way. And I would say that's kind of what the Batman Superman retelling did, was like all of a sudden it was just really crazy. And she had these clashes with Power Girl, and her, powers would go on the fritz when the two of them were together. And they both visit outer space and take on these different names. And, it was like, okay, we're really going, off the planet with this one. And Supergirl Being Super includes that origin story, but it all just sort of fits well. It's more about the writing and how they focus on her being a teenage girl with real life problems. And, the origin just kind of is the background. It's in the background there, it's like set dressing. They don't just literally retell it. And I really appreciated that. And I would say overall, just the striking thing about this comic is that it is, it's really sad. I don't, I just don't know a way around that. Like that was really as I was going through them all in one sitting, that was my takeaway, was like, wow, this is like a sad comic. She's about to turn 16. She has two really great friends. They all participate on the track team, and they at a track meet. One of them is like super athletic. One of them is super artsy, and has like purple hair. And then Kara is in between them. And at a track meet, there's this terrible earthquake, and literally kids are like falling into the earth, and they're rescuing them. And Kara makes this very daring rescue to save one of the friends who's fallen in there. She's holding on to her, and somehow her powers go on the fritz, and she drops her. So she has to deal with this death of like, did I do everything I could? But thankfully they don't linger on that, which was another like just cool, like just subtle little twist where you can see there's so many superhero stories where they linger on that one moment of, did I do enough? What, and they blame themselves so much. And she kind of quickly knows, like, I did enough and I just need to grieve. And it's like, oh, there's such a good portrayal of her mom and dad and how they treat her differently in that grief, with her mom bringing food to her room and her dad being like kind of too tough to talk about it, but still wanting to be near her and with her through that grief. And it's like, holy shit, this is a really three-dimensional superhero. I found myself like really invested in it. And then the way that the sort of, whatever you want to call it, like the super plot, the way this is revealed, is just in a really cool way. I don't want to give any spoilers because I think it's worth getting through it. It's not a very obvious thing. It's not like a big beam from space comes down and causes this earthquake and Supergirl gets called into action to fix it. It's very much about her discovering like herself, and she's been aware of these powers, but she's never done anything with them. And why are they suddenly going on the fritz? Does it have something to do with her turning 16? Is this like puberty for her? It's just about getting through this story, of this tragic thing that happens in her small town and her friend dying because of it. And the other friend, meanwhile, she is also sort of not had to pull her out of the split in the earth, but like a telephone pole falls and Kara is able to deflect it from her friend, so her friend kind of knows like something's different with you. What's going on?
But like nobody, like Superman or nobody has interceded to go, hey, Kara, you're from Krypton. Like she doesn't know anything about that. Yes. Like her parents didn't impart that to her.
Well, so without going to without giving any spoilers away, she has always been aware that she has been it's funny. It's kind of like even me, my hesitation at saying alien is because I think this character would hesitate to call herself an alien. She knows that in herself, because she knows there's a craft in the barn and she arrived in it and her parents found her and they protected her and hid the craft. And she, there's a really great flashback when she, there's a great flashback when she sees her teacher at her house and her parents are talking to the teacher about her missing class and the grief she's dealing with, where she sees this scene and flashes back to the scene in her youth, where there's kind of a rift in the family because her parents have taken her in, and these other people in the family are worried about it and they don't really trust her. And it's so well done. It's like it was almost like reading a novel. And
interesting.
And I've plugged Gwenda Bond has a series of YA novels about Lois Lane, and those are very, very YA-ish. And this almost feels a little bit older than those, even though it's right at the same age level or whatever. But it was just, it's hard to do. It's hard to do the measured complexity of a superhero. For so long, complexity has just meant making it more dark, making them like have to struggle with killing somebody or something like that. And, or it's, it's the Marvel way of the superheroes with the feet of clay. And and I feel like Marvel kind of tosses in these nuggets from time to time about, oh, they've got a zit or they're a teenager or what, it's just sort of, what do you want to call it? It's just window dressing that they're teenagers. It's not like you don't feel it always like they're going through the same thing. Especially with like the X-Men, which I think is a great example of those teenagers going through that, is they're in a high school with other mutants. So yeah, they're having these weird feelings and problems.
Good point.
But they're not the alien that's separated. And so it actually, the way it unravels in this, like Superman is not in the background. And that's a really challenging thing to do in a Supergirl story.
Why is that? Is there a reason for that?
You only find out much later in that he's only just then appearing on the scene.
Okay.
And so it's the news just hasn't really traveled about him yet.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, it's very, again, it's like just that's kind of a quiet thing that's in the background, and it doesn't take up that much of the story. Like when you find out about it, it just sort of answers that question for you of, oh, that's why we haven't seen him yet.
I feel like this would be a perfect companion piece to Superman American Alien, which we've talked about before, which I love. I love that book. Because that book is really a lot of the same themes, right? It's Superman, nobody sat him down and went like, you're from Krypton, Cal. Like nobody gave him that information. So he's coming to terms with his power. Like even when he's, like a little kid and he's just inexplicably floating and his dad has to hold on to him so he doesn't float away. Like just all these things. And then him figuring out, it actually takes, spoilers, it takes Lobo in the final book to actually explain to him what he is. And at that point, he's just only gotten the suit. So I almost feel like you could end Superman American Alien and just go right into the Supergirl book, and they would probably line up pretty effectively. It's almost, I hesitate to call them Elseworlds because it is kind of that, but it also, when you find a sort of canon that feels more legitimate to you, it almost becomes it's your canon. So it's not an Elseworlds book anymore. It's like, no, that is Superman's origin to me. Like that is his life. I'd much rather see that as a movie than any other story. I also like that you kind of called Marvel out a little bit on that, because a lot of people point to, they represent real teenage life, or like they represent like people as people. And yeah, they do, but a lot of it is, like you said, window dressing. And I feel like DC tends to dig a little deeper or get a little headier if they need to, in these kinds of things, which they should. They shouldn't shy away from that.
Well, of course, it's so much when I'm reading a Marvel or DC, a condensed story like this, do I think of this quote that I saw a long time ago from a creator who said, DC is a creator's paradise because they let you take these characters who are just these huge archetypes and tell whatever story you want with them. Within reason, of course. But Marvel is much more of like a fan's paradise because they're so concerned with having everything fit back together in the canon. But I think that really kneecaps Marvel, because you can't, when they tell an alternate origin story, it just doesn't ring true, because you're like, well, this is just, then it definitely feels like that Elseworlds kind of thing. Whereas in DC, it's almost like a Rashomon sort of thing. Am I using that correctly? It's like, this is how we saw the origin of Supergirl going, or this is how we saw it going. It's like they can all sort of take their shot at it. And for me, it's definitely not so much about the origin story now as the circumstances of the character in that origin story, if that makes any sense, because everyone wants to just go like, let's tell the story as if they just appeared on the scene in 2017. And it's so much more challenging to do what Tamaki and Jones have done here and make it contemporary, but grounded. Like they didn't have to start with the spacecraft landing on Earth and tell it sort of in order that way. It's like, let's take it from here. It's kind of like, boy, I almost wish they would put this in canon and just pick up Supergirl.
Let me ask you on that front, in normal canon, does Kara, does she always know where she's from and who she is? Like, does she remembers her parents putting her in there going, you have to look after Cal? Or is that like just one of many origin sort of threads that gets pulled in from time to time?
No, I think that's canon. I think canon is that it might not be that she always knows it. It might be that in this one where she's trying to piece it together.
Okay.
of what she knows to be true and what she's fuzzy on, which is that's the real mystery of this, is not so much what caused this earthquake. It's almost like, that's the B story of what's the
Mm.
disaster that's happening in her
Hmm.
town, and the A story is what's going on in her life that's doing all
Yeah.
these, and it's just great how the two connect. And I would say, if I want to just be honest and talk about like shortcomings, the resolution to that B story, to the like action part, is it's so tidy and quickly handled that I actually had to flip back through and go, did I miss a page? You know,
Mm. Hmm.
um, I, the good thing about it is they don't try. I mean, I say tidy, but they don't wrap it up and like put a bow on it. It's basically she um, solves the problem at hand, and the larger danger is still lurking, and
Nice.
that's fine. That's got like a
Oh,
cool.
totally.
It's not really like a cliffhanger. It's like that's how a season ends.
Yeah.
You don't feel unsatisfied that you didn't beat the big baddie in that one moment. That's okay. Um, and
It sounds almost like this didn't necessarily have to be a Supergirl book. Like the main story could have been about any character from a small town. It just happens to be Supergirl in this case, but it could have been like, Penelope Wincup, fights this, has superpowers suddenly and fights like any of those like indie image titles that we like, where they do some kind of like origin story or something, or people with extraordinary abilities. I mean, is
yeah,
that a fair assessment?
that's pretty fair. I think you and I have both talked about at least the first arc in Huck,
Yeah.
and
Ooh, good call.
there's
Yeah.
definitely like it's in that same family. Like I would basically say that, like, if you're a pure indie person but you enjoyed Huck, like you probably enjoy this, and but I also think like if you're just a Supergirl fan, like you're going to enjoy this, and it's going to feel really full. And I think one of the problems, as much as I liked the weird retelling of Supergirl in the Batman Superman books of like the early 2000s, it was just they started out telling Supergirl's story through the eyes of these two dudes in the universe.
Hmm.
And that's fine. They are the huge patriarchs of the universe, I guess. In that, I mean, it's Batman and Superman. It's not like she was like it wasn't like the Flash and Robin were looking after her or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it almost made her. She didn't have a personality in that book where she was introduced. Not until they spun out the Supergirl title did you encounter like Kara's personality. Whereas
Hmm.
this one is just so solidly her. No mention of Batman or any other heroes like that. And like I said, just this kind of background explanation of why you haven't seen Superman. And then that just really good feeling at the end of like, the story is the mystery is resolved, but the larger danger is still there, and so you can see like you can kind of imagine in your head of where this character is going to go after that. I did want to mention one thing just to address it, is that when I looked it up on the DC Comics page, this is kind of inexplicable to me. DC allows comments on their like single issue. Like
What?
if you just Google like DC Comics Supergirl being super, and you land on their, the DCComics.com page,
Hmm.
there's comments in there, like ratings basically, and which is great. I mean, it's a product to rate. It's just sort of funny when people do that, and you're faced with that. Well, do we moderate it? Do we take off the negative stuff? Not that it was negative, but I saw a couple of comments about, it's such a ripoff of the TV show, and I wish they would just go back to old Supergirl and New 52 and blah blah blah. And this was not the TV show at all. I don't know what these people are thinking. I feel like they reviewed the wrong comic book, because actually
Hmm.
the canon, like weekly or monthly title or whatever it is of Supergirl, at least with the last reboot when they gave her her own title again. Um, and I guess that wasn't New 52, but like a couple years ago, they just read everything with like an issue number one or something like that. I don't know what the hell's going on with DC anymore. But I did pick up several of those Supergirl issues, and that was exactly like the TV show. Like they had Cat Grant in it, and it was like, oh, we're going to use all the characters from the TV show and not mimic it, but definitely tie into it so they could grab those viewers. Whereas Supergirl being super is very much its own thing. Does not feel like the TV show at all. She is not in the, big city. She is in her small town. It's very, very personal. It's not about her being the hero. It's about her dealing with her issues and figuring out, her own origin story, basically. So
do you think there's a through the TV show, through things like this, do you think there's a focused effort to make Supergirl either at least on par with Superman or even more important or powerful than Superman for the foreseeable future?
I definitely think they want to get away from the idea that Supergirl is sort of a lesser super person that only appears as part of the super family or something. Mm-hmm. So I think they're doing a good job of that. Like even if I don't really want to criticize this, like the canon, monthly title of Supergirl. Like I haven't read it in a while, and I didn't stop reading it because I didn't like the story. I just stopped reading because I didn't really like the art, which is obviously we bring that up a lot. And so it didn't bother me that it had TV characters in it, is what I'm saying. Like, but I think you're onto something there, because I do think what DC wants to do is very much make Supergirl her own person that we don't see as part of the Superman, legacy.
Well, it's like, from what I've seen of the TV show, especially when Superman does eventually show up in latter seasons, like he's very much a side character. It's like, oh, you're here. Okay. Like he's there to pitch in, but she basically, as soon as she can, she's like, I've got it. I'll take it from here. Like you run along now. And it's just kind of like, it was kind of interesting to see that, because part of my problem is I've yet to see, other than Superman American Alien, that was the first time I ever gave two craps about that character. Even as good as Christopher Reeve was, I never have cared about Superman. So much of what he is hokey. Like, and it's funny too, because like Goku from Dragon Ball Z is basically the exact same character, and I could watch him 10 hours to maybe 10 minutes of what I would watch of Superman. So it took that book coming out for me to actually go, oh my God, this is the first time I give a crap. But then seeing Kara's story evolve too, like it would be great to see more stories in the future around her relationship with him, maybe some Elseworld stuff where she does get here before he does. So she is older than him, and we actually see, like that kind of thing where she has to like guide him. One of the things
she doesn't arrive before him, but she is older than him when she arrives. Yes.
She's older, but she physically hasn't aged accordingly. She's been around longer than him, but she was in stasis. So she doesn't, she's still a girl. She's not like Superwoman. She's his little big cousin, or whatever you want to say. But the thing that like I've craved for a while now, and you kind of hinted at it with that other run on Supergirl, but I have craved a story where she gets here before Cal does, as was planned, and ends up getting like brought into the Amazon world a little bit more at some point, more in a mainstream way. Maybe Diana's mother, maybe Hippolyta like pulls her in, or somehow she winds up there so she's able to mature as like a strong, like, kind of warrior woman. And then she's able to guide Clark or Cal when he shows. Like, I want to see them play with that, because I think there's a lot of, with DC doing this whole White Knight offshoot of Batman, I would love to see more of that kind of stuff on the Supergirl Superman front, because I think it's almost like they have a lot of fertile ground to tell some interesting twists, like what would have happened if she had gotten here first. Like, let's see that. Maybe it has. I'm not aware of those books.
And if it has, I'm not aware of it either. The super family is gigantic right now. There's there's a super boy, I think. I don't understand where he came from. There's a super woman. And they're all different people, and I don't know what the fuck's going on.
At some point though, but wait. At some point, and this is my biggest problem with the big two, all of this, like the beginning stuff, like the first act of any of these characters is always so awesome. At some point, that third act, which, the third act never technically comes for anybody. In some stories or Elseworld tales, like it does. But what happens when you get that many people with abilities? Like, the world wouldn't just go on and these people are just hanging out. Like, I want to see more done to talk about the pitfalls of when you get that many, like freaking Watchmen did it with one guy. They're like, oh God, Dr. Manhattan's here. He has completely changed the entire global political equation. Like, what happens when you get that many super people in one spot? Like when I watched, I watched the Justice League cartoon back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I had to stop because at some point there was like 75 members of the Justice League. And I'm like, okay, what? Right. Clearly, like, world governments would be very uncomfortable with that. Like when there's just like this never-ending group of meta humans. Like what? Like they can't just run around being heroes. Like there's got to be more to it than that. And even like amongst themselves, like I want to see more infighting, more maybe somebody goes astray, or maybe like like that. There's a lot of meat there that I wish the big two would handle more than they do. Like Image does it just fine. Image has a lot of Image titles too are meant to end. Right. Whereas most of the big two doesn't have that luxury, as much. So
I mean, that kind of speaks to that problem of just like, it is much better to just have a Supergirl title where she's developed on her own, because once you start all those team ups, you face that question. And then if you're Marvel and everything has to be in canon, you do crazy shit like the House of M or whatever these other things are, where they literally wipe out, 95% of the superheroes. And then, of course, a few years later, they're like, we really need more superheroes. So they bring them all back in some resurrecting way or whatever. And it's like, I like this. I think at other times I've spoken to like a good team up, but this one really just it hit me in a good spot. So I definitely recommend it.
Last question. Did you get it physically or digitally?
Oh, physically. Yeah.
Do you recommend that?
There's, just being honest, I'm not like a big digital comic book reader. Like comics are the one artifact that I think it's cool to own, as opposed to like music or movies or something. But I don't think it matters in this case. Like I bet it looks just as good digitally. It's not, I don't think you're missing anything if you go digital. And certainly if there's, an easy way to just grab all 4 issues digitally, that's the way to go. It's really well done, like through the chapters, but I definitely think it's like a good, single sitting read. Just bang through it,
Cool.
I think it's worth noting, of course, too. I don't know what the creator teams are on Supergirl and Superwoman and stuff like that right now, but just having a all-female creative team, I think, is really significant and allowed them to tell a story about a teenage girl in a way that men don't do when they get their run on those books. So, yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Well, my pick is not it is mainstream, but not in America. At least not yet. Yeah. It is I went the manga route this time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I actually picked up book 1 of the Black edition of Death Note.
Okay. I know nothing about this series at all.
Well, so the story's by Sugumi Oba and illustrated by Takeshi Obata. Hopefully I didn't murder that pronunciation. But I say it's the Black edition because, and by the way, published by Viz Media in the States. The Black edition takes volumes 1 and 2. So in manga terms, it's like their volumes 1 and 2 of their trades, and puts together in a single book that is actually really cool. The page edges are all black, so when you pick it up, it's just one giant black tome that is sort of reminiscent of the actual Death Note notebook that's in the story. I mentioned this also though because there are 6 of these goddamn things. Like book 1 is what I'm holding right now, and it's pretty thick. For a manga, it's pretty substantial. But there are 6 of these. So I just read
6 of these kind of omnibus collections that you're holding?
Of Death Note, of the story of Death Note, which I don't understand how they did this, because this book is pretty, like, they could have just ended it right here, and they actually wrap up a lot of things in this particular volume. I mean, there's a big kind of overarching thing, but I can't imagine they don't finish that in the second book. So like the fact that there are 6, I'm really wondering like what on earth could possibly stretch them into that territory. It's just crazy. But before I jump further into that, and by the way, too, the original publication in Japan was through Weekly Shonen Jump, which is a magazine over there. So if you really want to go old school and get the actual original publication, look for an issue of Weekly Shonen Jump. And then again, Viz Media here in the States. The synopsis is this. The series centers around a high school student named Light who discovers a supernatural notebook that allows him to kill anyone by writing the victim's name while picturing their face. So you got to know what they look like, and you got to know their name. And then it follows his attempts to create and lead a world cleansed of evil using the book, and the complex conflict between himself and those assailing him or trying to find out who he is. So Light is this kind of, gifted high school kid, one of those kids who's in like the public school or private school, whatever it is, but he's really bored. He gets A's all the time. He's basically like a really high functioning kid, and he's just bored, and he finds this notebook one day on the street. And he picks it up, and it says Death Note, and it's got some rules written in it. And as soon as he touches it, he sees this giant demon called a Shinigami. And it looks, trying to describe it. If you're listening at home, or I guess, Todd, if you're not looking it up on Google Images, the Shinigami in this is like, it's almost like an 80s punk rocker with some like, because he's got like this black, almost like leather suit on with some frills and everything. And he's got like, his skin is stapled on the neck side, and he's got like a kind of a rictus grin. But for the most part, like you could easily imagine like Jermaine Clemens from Flight of the Conchords, like just dressed up for the night with like some crazy ass makeup on. And you basically have this guy. Now, coincidentally, Netflix, and the reason I even know this exists is because Netflix did a movie this year based on, I think, most of this first book or this first kind of volume. Maybe it dips into the second. And Willem Dafoe actually voices the Shinigami in that one. But the Netflix movie is dog shit. It is not good. It is it's awful. Especially after reading it, because I'm like, I watched it on Netflix going, okay, this is obviously based on a manga. I'm guessing they missed, as bad as it is, they must have missed a lot of good stuff. So I'm really curious to see what they missed. And sure enough, the book has a lot of richer, it just makes way more sense, has a lot of richer detail. Like they've made it an Americanized mess. And then the only cool thing is the Shinigami voiced by Willem Dafoe. Like that works really well.
So, okay, so back up, or not to back up, but let me question you on this. So you were unfamiliar with the manga before you watched that movie that was on Netflix?
Correct. Never had heard of it before, or hadn't even seen it. So
what drew you to watch that?
I had just seen a bunch of press on it, and it kept popping up at Netflix on it. You might also like, because their algorithm kind of pegged it. And again, they showed in the trailer, they show the demon, they show the Shinigami. Yeah. And the Shinigami is a Japanese death demon. So the Death Note is his book, and because he's also bored, because like I said, like Light, the character Light is forget his last name, god dang it, but Light, it's like Light Torigami or something. I'll find it out. But like the Shinigami as well, he's bored, so he just drops the Death Note onto the human world to see what happens, and Light happens to pick it up. So for the entirety of the story, the Shinigami is kind of like not haunting Light, but he's always there. And as long as you're holding the Death Note, you can see him, but nobody else can. So he's got to be careful, when he talks out loud to himself, or, if he hands him like an apple, to everybody else, it looks like the apple's just floating in midair. And the actual Shinigami's he's got a name. It's like Ryuku or Raiku. Oh man, this is going to drive me nuts. I got to look here. Hang on. I got to look up the actual names. I had all this pulled up.
I saw that it was Light Yagami.
Light Yagami. There we go. Yeah. And I think Ryuk is the name of the Shinigami. So it's like Ryuk and Light. And there's a lot of really good kind of interplay between them. Like Light pretty quickly, he's pretty level-headed and rational. So right away he's like, oh wow, you must be a Shinigami. He's like, yes, I am. My name is Ryuk. And they kind of have this like weird odd couple relationship where like, Ryuk is constantly interested in how Light wants to use the Death Note. It's kind of like, oh wow, he's really fascinated with humans. So this is almost like entertainment for him. And Light's constantly playing like head games with him to get him to like reveal more about the Death Note or more about certain things. And they're very clear. Like Ryuk very clearly early on goes like, hey, I'm not on your side, man. I'm just here to hang out and enjoy myself. So like, I'll tell you some basic stuff, but I'm not going to help you in your cause. Like I'm not like, you know, I'm not supportive. I'm not like your guardian angel or anything. I'm just here. And what Light wants to do with the Death Note, once he realizes what it is and what it can do, he goes on this quest to rid the world of crime. So he starts writing like actual criminals' names in the Death Note, and they all die. Now, early on, you discover if he doesn't say anything else, he knows what they look like, and he puts their name in, they just die of a heart attack. And I think there's like a time window. I think like within 27 hours or maybe even like 42 minutes. Like there's different rules depending on how you write somebody's name in, but you can also specify how they die. And then as the story goes along, he learns more and more about the rules and kind of like the rules that can be bent in the Death Note. So he, you know, at some point he learns, you know, he can actually control the actions of somebody before they die. So he can say, you know, this person goes and does this, and then they do this, and then they die this way. And typically that works. At some point, he starts to kill off, you know, a bunch of these criminals start to die, and then eventually the authorities take notice. And then Interpol takes notice because they're like, why are all these criminals just randomly dying? Light also makes a really crucial mistake in that as the story and sort of the conspiracy starts to spread about all these people dying, he creates this character called Kira, which is like an ancient Japanese god that he kind of uses as his ghost name or his character name. And basically they start to ascribe all this stuff to Kira. So he makes Kira into this like celebrity that like, you know, all, you know, everybody in the school is like, hey, you know, isn't Kira awesome? He's cleansing the world of all these bad people. That just gives Interpol more to think about. Eventually, and this is kind of where things really heat up, Interpol brings in this also another teenager named L. We never find out what his real name is, at least in this book, and I don't think we ever do. Well, maybe at some point, but in this book, we never find out what his name is. And I would say maybe 3/4 of the book, we never see his face. He's always hidden. He's talking to people through like, you know, layers of encryption or, you know, behind it. There's no video camera. He's talking through like, you know, a guy will walk into a room and open up a briefcase, and then you'll just hear L start talking. But he's kind of like this savant kid who's been instrumental in helping Interpol solve a bunch of different crimes. So it's kind of like, you know, like a hyper Sherlock Holmes aged 14. And they bring him in to start working on this case, and he figures things out pretty quickly. So eventually, after about the halfway point, the book becomes this cat and mouse game, this detective story between L and Light. And then eventually you find out, and this isn't really a spoiler, you learn this pretty quick, L's father is actually the head of the police department in their Japanese suburb or their county. So that becomes a big thing at some point. And then more people, they start to narrow in on where Light, or, you know, where Kira, quote unquote, who's really Light, might be hiding. So as that happens, Light has to shift his obsession with killing criminals to how do I scare all the people away who are trying to get after me. And that becomes this whole gradual slip of Light's morals. Like he one by one starts selling, you know, pushing the line. And it becomes pretty freaking corrupt. So the fact that there's like 6 of these, you know, these kind of big books, I really wonder where he ends up. You know, and then the entire time, Ryuk, his you know, the Shinigami demon who's kind of following him, is constantly like, he's kind of amazed. He's like, wow, you know, Light, you are as a human, you're pretty clever, and you know, you're almost as sinister as a Shinigami. You know, he makes a couple of remarks that Light would make a good Shinigami. So I'm wondering if that's not where this ends up heading. So yeah, there's a lot of, and I can't say too much more without getting into really heavy spoiler territory, but there's a lot of sinister stuff that pops up that you're like, oh my God, like that Light does for his own safety, but also for his cause. Because he's still like most, you know, I love the fact that stories like this, most bad guys don't just start off inherently evil. Like one of my biggest problems with Harry Potter is that Voldemort just is bad. Like it's never really, even as a little kid, he's just an evil little kid who grew up into an evil wizard. I like when villains or villainous or antagonistic elements, you know, they believe in something at the expense of their values or at the expense of their morality. Like that's where a real bad guy kind of evolves. Like when you ask them, like, do you think what you're doing is bad? They'll say, no, what I'm doing is just and right. It just happens to be at complete opposition to what most of society thinks is just and right. So all of a sudden you have the origins of this kind of bad guy who's actually the main character of the story. So it's a really, really cool, slow burn that you go through. And yeah, again, it's manga. It's all black and white, which is actually great because I think were this color, it'd be a little bit more distracting. The illustrations are beautiful, really well done. Really, especially for an American audience. Like it just, and let's remember, like the Japanese have been at this way longer than we have. I feel like the American comics market is just kind of now finally hitting that maturity that the Japanese have had for 20, 30 years. So it's like the Japanese can really weave a good story. Like they've gotten really, really freaking good at it. So if you like any of those indie titles that we've talked about before, if you like Image, if you've never picked up a manga, great time to start. This will be an easy read. I did this in an afternoon. It's long, but it goes pretty quick. I think if I end up getting the other volumes, I'm definitely going to go digitally on those because I don't have room for 6 of these to sit on my shelf, nor do I want to necessarily go through 6 more or 5 more. But it's a cool artifact for sure.
Let me, so I got a lot of questions, and if I let you keep talking, you'll probably just end up answering them, and this will make me sound smarter if I ask the questions first.
Definitely, no, go ahead.
So, first question is, this is super nerdy. Was it printed in a normal U.S. comic style where you're reading left to right, or is it printed in right to left?
Oh no, it's manga. You're going right to left, and
Nice.
They have a read this way sign like every 5th page to keep you on track. So yeah, it's funny as I was doing that, and I've read manga before, but when you get engrossed in something like this and you're going left to right and you're kind of reorienting your mind, it's a refreshing experience. It kind of reminds me of when we saw Arrival last year. You know how like the whole point of that story was your brain, your thoughts, the way you experience life can change simply based on the language that you're ingesting. Yeah. So I feel like in this case, like the story, because it's manga, because like the page tips are all black, because I'm going right to left, it felt different than it would have if they had just made it, truly, dumbed it down for the American audience. So I really appreciate that's fact.
Cool. And that also means that the art wasn't flipped, which is a thing that,
I hate that.
If you haven't read a manga before, you might not be aware that like if you're actually reading it left to right, it generally means they flipped everything.
Yeah.
And then, you're not actually seeing what the artist intended, which I think is a big
deal. Exactly.
So would you, you kind of answered both these questions. So I'll just ask them together. I'll try to come up with a combined question here. Do you think you actually would have picked this up if it were in another version, or was it really this version, this artifact that drew you to pick it up?
I think it was the way they designed it. Like, so I had seen the Netflix series.
Yeah.
Or sorry, the movie. And was
right. I was about to clarify that.
I was in a late night coffee shop with my fiance, and we walked in there, and I saw they had like this coffee shop just happened to have like a nice little curated graphic novel shelf for sale, and all 6 of these were sitting there, and I was like, Death Note. I'm like, oh my god, there's 6 of them. And I pulled it out, and I was like, oh, it just looked cool. The pages, being black gives it an extra sort of feel. Like the cover is cool. It's meant to feel like the Death Note book itself in the story. So that, I think if it wasn't that way, I would have still probably looked at it, but I probably wouldn't have bought it that night. Maybe I would have grabbed it digitally later. At some point I probably would have been curious enough to check it out. But the fact that I'm a sucker for really good, really well considered physical stuff. So I'm definitely, I'll always pick something up for that, almost beyond just the quality of the story of the art. Just like, how cool is it?
Well, and I think it really says something to it that you watched the movie, didn't really enjoy the movie. So it's not like you were into the story and looking like, let me see the better version of this story. It was, you weren't really into it. And then you
watched the movie though. I mean, I watched the movie and I'm like, the entire time I was like, okay, there's gotta be a better version of this.
Gotcha.
That it is mucked up. Cause like, there's no way that movie would have been a wildly successful manga the way it was. Like it was so watered down and no character development of any kind. Just the whole thing was kind of a mess. So I was curious to see what the Japanese really were intending.
Now, do you know, is this a manga that's still going in some spin-off version, or is it really like it's these 6 volumes and you're done?
And keep in mind, each volume is made, each book
is made
up of two traditional graphic, trades in Japan. I think it's done by everything I've seen. I don't know if they've spun it off. I mean, it seems like the kind of story that regardless of what happens to Light, if his story ends, that Death Note can just be sent to somebody else. So I would imagine it would be kind of interesting to see, like almost like an 80s horror movie where just like, this, other people keep having dreams. Whoever Freddy Krueger kills or is defeated by, he can just pop up again. So I feel like it's kind of in that tradition. You have the ability for this to keep going. That's almost why I want to kind of try to get through the rest of them just to see where this goes. Because I was perfectly satisfied with this story. It moved a little sluggishly in some spots. Like with most anime or manga, like there's a habit of kind of going a little too soap opera and letting certain scenes play out way too long, but it's not distracting. It's like, it's definitely to serve the story. It's more of I think a sensibility for me personally than a problem. But it is so, but I do want to kind of blaze through. I'm sorely tempted to Wikipedia the rest of it, just at least the general story arc, just to see what they could possibly do in 5 more, because I mean, I'm not going to say who, but they kill off some pretty important characters that you're like, okay, well that person's not coming back. Cause you thought, oh, well that's, surely that will be, his foil in the next book. And then they're gone. You're like, oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure what they're going to, and they kind of pigeonhole themselves at the end of the book. You're going to finish going, why is there 5 more? Like they could have wrapped this up in maybe 2 more chapters the way it was headed. So I'm really curious.
Well, so, just from a reading perspective, it sounds like in the story there are a lot of rules to this story, about how the book works and how the I already forgot how to pronounce the God of Death character works. Do you feel as a new reader to it that you understood those rules? Like, did they communicate that in a pretty clear way?
So the best part about that is after each chapter, or rather at the beginning of each chapter, there is a black page that says Death Note, how to use it. And it has different rules physically like written in both English, but also like the demon language, like translated below it. And most of the time when they call out rules, it has to do with something that's coming up in the chapter. So then it's expounded upon, or you see it like put into practice. And there's a couple of times where they actually repeat some of the rules. They're like, hey, remember this, rule number 3. And so, yeah, they do a great job of like keeping you aware of that. So like you'll read that and go, ooh, I wonder what this is going to be about. So it almost gets you excited to figure out how that plays into the following chapter or the following sort of story. I'm not going to say arc, but part.
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't hold your hand, but they definitely, they put it all out on the table. So it's if you're paying attention, it's very easy to stay engaged.
Very cool.
And there's actually some rules too. It's interesting. There are some rules that are like written in the Death Note. There are some rules that Light figures out for himself. And there's even, I think there's one part too where Ryuk goes, Light figures something out and Ryuk goes, oh, wow, I never knew that. That's interesting. Like, so there's things that like even Ryuk didn't know that Light is really, they kind of going back to like how they're portraying teenagers in this, like he's really freaking competent. And it's not like unbelievably so, but just like if you imagine a really smart, high achieving, like super bored with his base, his generic life Japanese kid, like this is him. Like you could easily do this. Which is something, by the way, that the movie did not do. Like the movie's version of Light is basically just like a generic high schooler kid who just happens to find the Death Note. And then they hook him up with this like girl who's his girlfriend, who's kind of his corrupting influence. And I'm like, that's not, it's not well thought out at all. Like there's just, the character of Light when done this way is really compelling. Cause again, it's almost, I'll say the most logical kind of comparison point is Breaking Bad. Cause Light starts off and he's, you get the sense he's a good kid, but he's just like, he's not that thrilled with his current state in life. And as this thing goes on, he just pushes his morality a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. So in that respect, if that's kind of where it's headed, I actually really am excited to see the rest of it. Cause if he goes full on, full tilt, just totally bad, if he ends up where Walter White does, like that's a really interesting journey. Yeah.
Do you happen to know, was the movie a purely American production?
It has to be. It has to be. Let me see though.
Yeah, I don't know that either. Whether it was created in Japan and then turned into a US Netflix release or what?
It is produced by, there's some Japanese producers. That doesn't mean the company. I mean, it was funded by Netflix. I mean, it was. So the production companies were LP Entertainment, Vertigo Entertainment, and Lin Pictures, and then distributed by Netflix. So I think Netflix bought it. Lin Pictures, who is that? That's Dan Lin, a Taiwanese-born American film producer. So my guess is, like most things, it probably started off a lot purer and more loyal to the book than it ended up. Because the movie reeks of that, just, that meddling from studio people. Like, well, maybe this person should be a black character so that we have that covered. And maybe this should be like, it just felt like designed by committee to the point where it lost all punch. Like I would rather it have been like a very tight film, that was more of like a director's vision start to finish. I think it would have been it would have been a lot more satisfying. Although also it's one of those things where I don't know if a movie's length can really accommodate the story. They probably would have been better off just doing a series, honestly.
Huh. Yeah, it's hard to say when they make one bad movie that it's hard to picture like they should have expanded it. But
well, again, but like if your main character is an anti-hero and you're watching his slow slide into villainhood, I mean, like imagine if Breaking Bad was a movie. Like it just you wouldn't buy it. It'd be like there's no, like you get 50 hours of seeing this character turn this way. Like that's way more powerful. So I mean, again, I need to see where the rest of the manga goes, but I can highly recommend if you're new to manga, if you love manga already, if you just like indie stories in general, like pick this up. It is a welcome addition on my shelf.
Cool. Very cool. I do note that in the film, his name is Light Turner.
At that point, they should just change the first name too, because like there's something kind of metaphorical about it being Light Yagami and like just sort of what he represents, and like it's just a hipster kid name in the movie. Like there's so much about that movie. Like I recommend everybody go watch the movie just to get a sense of it and see how cool because Ryuk in that movie is cool. He's really well done, and freaking Willem Dafoe's voice is kind of perfect, but the book is so much better. I'm usually not one of those people. I almost am never one of those people that's like, the book was better, because then a lot of times it's not. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I mean, I can name countless examples where no, the movie was actually a much better execution of this. Not in this case. The book is clearly better.
Interesting. That's an awesome endorsement, and that's why this is the Coffee and Comics podcast.
That's right.
Not our usual alcohol and movies podcast.
That'll come later. We'll do that. We'll do that when Thor Ragnarok hits theaters in a week or two.
Oh, dude. Yes, we will. Well, tell me, Taylor, where can people find this podcast?
Well, we'd love for you to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and tell your friends to do the same. Share an episode. Let them know about the Todd and Taylor Show. You can also find us on Twitter and SoundCloud and Instagram. We are Find Us There, all one word on those platforms. And then, of course, findusthere.org is our website, findusthere.org. And you'll find our other shows, too. We have several other shows and some other cool things coming down the pike. So keep tabs on us, tell your friends, and let us know if you've listened to the show and you're like, hey, I want you guys to review this book next. Like, let us know. We'd love to hear what you're reading, what you want to read. Use us as your guinea pigs. We'd love to kind of, be a good source of curation for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And generally speaking, we have been releasing these episodes on Saturday mornings. It's like the adult version of watching your cartoons with your cereal. So exactly. grab a coffee, tune into Coffee and Comics. Thank you for being here, Taylor. And I'm Todd A. And we'll catch you next week for another Coffee and Comics.